The cold wasn't just in the air that day, it was a premonition. A bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the slow, creeping dread that had become my constant companion. They say a grandmother's love is a special kind of fierce. A love that has weathered its own storms and now seeks only to be a safe harbor. My love for Alex, my grandson, wasn't just a harbor. It was a fortress. And its walls were about to be tested. If you've ever felt the sting of being pushed aside by your own family, or the fire that ignites when you see a child being wronged, then you know the journey I'm about to share. It's a story about a Thanksgiving that changed everything. So, if you're ready, do me a favor, tap that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and it lets me know that these stories of justice are ones that need to be told. Now, let's get back to that day. The day the ice began to crack.
Part 1. The Gilded Cage. It all started, as these things so often do, with a wedding. My son, David, had always been a good boy. A little soft around the edges, perhaps, too eager to please, but his heart was solid gold. I'd raised him on my own, working 2 jobs, juggling bills and scraped knees, and through it all, we were a team. When he met Veronica, I was thrilled for him. She was polished. That's the word for it. She came from money, the kind of old, quiet wealth that announces itself in the perfect tailoring of a coat and the effortless dismissal of anything deemed common. Her smile was a work of art, perfectly symmetrical, but it never, not once, reached her eyes. Her eyes were like chips of Arctic ice. In the beginning, her slights were so subtle I thought I was imagining them. She'd compliment my home-cooked meals by calling them wonderfully rustic, her tone suggesting she'd just observed a charming farm animal. She'd buy me expensive, useless gifts for my birthday, a silk scarf in a color I'd never wear, a bottle of perfume so overpowering it made my eyes water, as if to say, let me show you what good taste looks like. It was a quiet, insidious campaign to relegate me to the role of the quaint, slightly embarrassing mother-in-law. David, blinded by what he saw as her sophistication, noticed none of it. She's just trying to include you, Mom, he'd say, a gentle placating note in his voice that felt more patronizing than reassuring. Then, Alex was born. The moment I held him, a fierce, primal wave of love washed over me, so potent it left me breathless. He was a piece of my David, a continuation of our little team. For the first few years, things were manageable. I was useful to them. I was the free babysitter, the emergency contact, the one who knew how to soothe his colic when Veronica's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on her phone. In those moments, with Alex asleep on my chest, his tiny breaths fogging the fabric of my shirt, I could almost forget the ice in his mother's eyes. I could pretend we were a real family. But as Alex grew from a baby into a little boy, a boy with his own thoughts and occasional messes, I watched Veronica's patience wear thin, then disappear entirely. Alex wasn't a charming accessory anymore. He was an inconvenience. He was loud. He was clumsy. He preferred my simple, hand-knitted sweaters to the designer outfits she'd force him into for her endless social media posts. The #PerfectFamily felt like a cruel joke every time I saw it beneath a photo of Alex looking stiff and uncomfortable. Her cruelty toward him was like her cruelty toward me, a death by 1,000 cuts. It was in the way she'd sigh loudly when he'd spill a drop of juice. The way she'd tell him to go play, with a tone that meant disappear. The way she'd talk about him to her friends on the phone, right in front of him, as if he were a misbehaving pet she was considering getting rid of. He's just so much today, she'd complain, her voice dripping with theatrical exhaustion. Alex would just stand there, his shoulders slumped, his bright eyes dimming a little more each time. My visits became more and more restricted. Spontaneous pop-ins were forbidden. We need structure, Evelyn, Veronica would explain, her smile tight. You understand. Phone calls had to be scheduled. I was being managed, contained, slowly and methodically excised from their lives. David, caught in the middle, became her mouthpiece. It's just easier this way, Mom. Veronica gets stressed. Stressed? My boy didn't know the meaning of the word. I'd worked a double shift at the diner and then stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costume. That was stress. This was control. The months leading up to that Thanksgiving were the worst yet. I'd hear from them less and less. When I'd call, David would sound distracted, his answers short. I knew Veronica was likely standing right beside him, her arms crossed, her icy gaze daring him to have a real conversation with his own mother. My requests to see Alex were met with a string of flimsy excuses. He has a playdate. He's not feeling well. We're just so busy. I knew they were lies. The truth was, I was being erased. And in erasing me, they were isolating Alex. My heart ached with a helplessness that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with 1,000 dark possibilities. Which brings us to that Thanksgiving. The year before, I'd hosted. My tiny apartment had been filled with the scent of roasting turkey and the sound of Alex's delighted shrieks as he played with his cousins. This year, Veronica was hosting at their new, sprawling home in the suburbs, a house her parents had paid for. I wasn't explicitly uninvited, but the invitation never came. When I'd asked David about their plans, he'd mumbled something about keeping it small this year. The message was clear. It was a small gathering for people who mattered. I was not one of them. For 2 weeks, I stewed in a mix of hurt and anger. But then, the grandmother in me took over. The fierce, protective love that refused to be sidelined. To hell with her, I thought. My grandson will not have a Thanksgiving without seeing his grandma. He deserved his favorite pie. He deserved a hug that wasn't for a photograph. So, I baked. I poured all my frustration, all my love, all my worry into a pumpkin pie, the one with the extra cinnamon, just the way Alex liked it. The warmth of the oven filled my small kitchen, a stark contrast to the bitter cold that was sweeping through the state. The news anchors called it an Arctic blast, a polar vortex. The temperature had plummeted to a shocking 5 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill that made it feel like 10 below. I bundled up in my heaviest coat, my worn wool scarf, and thick gloves, placing the still warm pie carefully in a carrier on the passenger seat. The drive to their perfect house in their perfect neighborhood was agonizing. With every mile, a little voice of doubt whispered in my ear. They don't want you here. You're making a fool of yourself. But a louder voice, the voice of my love for Alex, roared back. He wants you here. He needs you. I pulled up to the curb. The house was blazing with light, every window glowing with a warm, buttery light that promised laughter and abundance. I could see the silhouettes of people moving inside, laughing, their heads thrown back. I could almost hear the clinking of wine glasses. A wreath of pine and holly hung on the massive oak door. It was a perfect picture, a Norman Rockwell painting of family and togetherness. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. A small shape was huddled on the front steps, just outside the golden ring of light from the porch lamp. My breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought it was a bundle of blankets, or maybe a forgotten decoration. I got out of the car, the pie carrier in my hand, and the wind hit me like a physical blow. It was brutal, a sharp, invasive cold that stole the air from my lungs. And as I walked up the stone path, my heart didn't just stop. It shattered into a million ice-cold pieces. It wasn't a bundle of blankets. It was Alex.
My sweet, 6-year-old grandson was sitting on the frozen concrete steps, shivering violently. He was wearing nothing but a thin t-shirt and a pair of shorts. His little legs were red and mottled with the cold. His lips had a terrifying bluish tint. His arms were wrapped around his tiny frame in a desperate, futile attempt to generate warmth. He wasn't crying. He was just shaking, his eyes fixed on the front door, the door to his own home. I dropped the pie. The ceramic dish shattered on the frozen ground, the scent of pumpkin and cinnamon lost in the icy air. I didn't care. I ran to him, my mind a blank wall of sheer, unadulterated horror. Alex. Oh, my God, Alex. He looked up, and his eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were dull and glassy. Recognition flickered. Grandma, he whispered, his voice a dry, rattling thing. His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely form the word. I ripped off my heavy coat and wrapped it around him, pulling him into my arms. He felt impossibly cold, like a statue carved from ice. I frantically rubbed his hands, his arms, trying to bring some life back into them. Baby, what are you doing out here? Why aren't you inside? He huddled against me, burying his face in my sweater, his small body racked with tremors. He finally managed to get the words out, each one a dagger in my heart. "Mom said I wasn't allowed inside," he chattered. She said I was being too loud and that I ruin everything. I ruin everything. The words echoed in the frozen air, sucked the breath from my lungs, and replaced it with a white-hot, volcanic rage. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, that front door. The warmth and laughter behind it suddenly seemed monstrous, grotesque. My entire life, I had prided myself on being a good person. Kind, patient, forgiving. But in that instant, holding my freezing grandson, something inside me broke. The woman who had baked a pie to build a bridge was gone. In her place was something ancient and terrible. A she-bear whose cub had just been threatened. I scooped Alex up into my arms. He was light, too light. I held his hand, and it was stiff and cold. And with every ounce of fury I possessed, I marched toward that front door. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I drew my foot back and kicked it, right below the handle. The wood splintered, the lock gave way, and the door flew open with a deafening slam that vibrated through the entire house. The scene inside froze, suspended in time. Veronica's parents, her brother, my own son David, all of them were seated around a magnificent dining table. A golden brown turkey sat in the center, glistening under the light of a crystal chandelier. Wineglasses were raised. Plates were piled high with food. And at the head of the table sat Veronica, a smug, satisfied smile on her face as she told some amusing story. That smile evaporated when she saw me. Her face went slack with shock, then twisted into a mask of pure fury. Everyone stared, their forks and glasses frozen mid-air. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the marble fireplace. My voice, when it came out, was not my own. It was a low, guttural thunder that shook the very air in that opulent room. I held up Alex's small, blue-tinged hand for them all to see. "You will never treat him like this again." The silence that followed was absolute. David's face drained of all color, his eyes wide with a dawning horror, as if seeing his son for the first time. Veronica's parents looked confused, then appalled. But it was Veronica's face I focused on. The shock had been replaced by a cold, defiant glare. There was no remorse. No shame. Only anger at being interrupted, at having her perfect party ruined. And in her eyes, I saw with chilling clarity that this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't a mistake. This was who she was. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was no longer a family squabble. This was war. Part 2, the Cold War. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't wait for the pathetic excuses I knew were already forming on my son's lips. I turned my back on their feast, on their shocked faces, and carried my grandson out into the brutal cold, slamming the broken door behind me. The sound of their world shattering was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The drive back to my small apartment was a blur of frantic energy. I cranked the heat up so high the air was thick and dry, but Alex was still shivering in my coat, his small body curled into a tight ball on the passenger seat. I talked to him the whole way, a constant stream of soothing nonsense, telling him he was safe, that Grandma was here, that everything was going to be okay. I was trying to convince myself as much as I was him. Back in my apartment, the real work began. I stripped off his thin, useless clothes and plunged him into a lukewarm bath, terrified of warming him up too quickly. His skin was frighteningly pale, almost translucent. As the water slowly warmed around him, a little color began to return to his cheeks. I washed him gently, my hands shaking with residual rage. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, listless, his eyes holding a deep, hollow look that no 6-year-old should ever have. After his bath, I wrapped him in the fluffiest towels I owned and then dressed him in a set of old pajamas of David's that I'd kept, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. I sat him on the sofa, buried him in blankets, and made him the sweetest, most marshmallow-filled cup of hot chocolate I could manage. He held the mug in both hands, still trembling, and took a small sip. It was then, as the warmth finally began to penetrate the deep chill in his bones, that he started to talk. It came out in fits and starts, a torrent of whispered confessions he had been holding in for God knows how long. This wasn't the first time he'd been punished like this. It was just the worst. He told me about being sent to his room without dinner for accidentally scuffing his mother's expensive shoes. He told me about being forced to stand in the corner of the garage for an hour because he'd cried when she'd cancelled their trip to the park. He told me that she called him her little disappointment when his father wasn't around. Each revelation was a fresh twist of the knife in my heart. Veronica hadn't just neglected him, she had been systematically, emotionally torturing him. Breaking his spirit, piece by tiny piece. My son called, of course. About an hour after I'd left. His name flashed on my screen, and I felt a surge of pure contempt. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice intentionally flat and cold. "Hello, David." "Mom?" "Oh, thank God. Is Alex okay?" He sounded frantic, breathless. "He's warming up," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "No thanks to you or that monster you married." "Mom, please." It was a misunderstanding. A horrible, horrible mistake. Veronica she lost her temper. He was throwing a tantrum, and she just wanted to give him a minute to cool off. She didn't realize how cold it was. She feels terrible, she's been crying her eyes out. The lies were so blatant, so pathetic, they were insulting. Crying her eyes out? I'd seen the look on her face. It was the face of a queen whose coronation had been disrupted by a peasant. "A minute, David?" His lips were blue. The doctor on the phone said he was showing signs of hypothermia. A few more minutes and we'd be having a very different conversation. "Did you even look at him? Did you even notice he was gone?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. A heavy, guilty silence. I was helping serve the food," he stammered. "I thought he was in his room." "He was outside, David. In 5-degree weather. Because your wife told him he ruins everything." I let the words hang in the air, heavy and sharp. "He told me everything. This isn't the first time she's done things like this." "That's not true," he shot back, his panic turning to defensiveness. "He's a kid, Mom," he exaggerates. "You know how he can be. You're twisting this, trying to make Veronica look bad. You've never liked her." The accusation struck me with the force of a physical blow. After everything I had done for him, for our family, this was his response. To defend her. To accuse me. The last vestiges of the love I had for the son I once knew began to curdle into something that felt horribly like pity. "Put Alex on the phone," he demanded. "I want to talk to my son." "No," I said, my voice as hard as steel. "You lost that right when you left him shivering on a doorstep. He's staying with me tonight. He is safe here. You can't do that. I'm his father." "Then start acting like it," I snarled, and I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. The battle lines had been drawn. The next few days were a tense, quiet war. David left a dozen voicemails, alternating between rage and pathetic pleading. Then came the texts from Veronica. They were masterpieces of passive aggression. "Evelyn, I know you're upset, but you are creating a very toxic situation. Alex needs to be with his parents. Please don't do this to our family." Then, when I didn't respond, "You are kidnapping my son. We will call the police." Let them, I thought. Let them send an officer to my door. Let them see this warm, safe apartment and the little boy who was finally starting to smile again. Let them ask him where he'd rather be. Veronica's attack, however, was far more insidious than a simple police report. She began a calculated smear campaign. She posted a long, tearful message on her social media accounts, a carefully cropped photo of her and David looking worried. She wrote about a difficult family situation and a grandmother with control issues who is sadly becoming unstable. She spoke of her unconditional love for her son and her heartbreak at being kept from him. Her friends, the flock of polished, wealthy women who orbited her, chimed in with messages of support. "Stay strong, V. We know what an amazing mother you are. Some people just can't handle seeing you happy." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was painting me as a crazy, jealous old woman who had stolen a child out of spite. To the outside world, she was the victim. The isolation was crushing. A few of our extended family members called, confused, having only heard Veronica's side of the story. They were hesitant, their words laced with a gentle skepticism that felt like a betrayal. "Evelyn, are you sure you're not overreacting a little?" my cousin asked. "Maybe you should just let the boy go home." Doubt, that poisonous weed, began to sprout in the dark corners of my mind during the long, sleepless nights. I'd sit in the armchair in my living room, watching Alex sleep on the sofa, his face finally peaceful, and I'd wonder. Had I made things worse for him? By taking him, had I started a war he would be the ultimate casualty of? I was alone. My own son was against me. The world she had built saw me as the villain. I felt old, tired, and utterly powerless. I had no money to fight her, no influence. All I had was the truth, and the truth, I was beginning to fear, wasn't nearly enough. One morning, about a week after Thanksgiving, I was looking through an old photo album. There was a picture of me and a much younger David, laughing on a carousel. And then, a picture of a baby Alex, wrapped in a blue blanket, his tiny hand curled around my finger. I traced the outline of his face, and a fresh wave of determination washed over me, so fierce it felt like a physical jolt. The helplessness vanished, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She had underestimated me. They all had. They saw a quiet old woman, a relic from a simpler life. They didn't see the woman who had clawed her way through poverty and heartbreak to raise a son. They didn't see the steel in my spine, forged in the fires of a life that had been anything but easy. Veronica wanted a war? Fine. But she was playing checkers. I was about to learn how to play chess. She fought with whispers and lies on social media. I was going to fight with something far more powerful, evidence, facts, and the unshakable fury of a grandmother who had absolutely nothing left to lose. My struggle wasn't over. It had just begun. And my first move was going to be a phone call that would change everything. Part 3, The Architect of Justice. The name on the yellow legal pad felt foreign on my tongue. Martha Davies, Family Law. I'd found her through a women's shelter I used to donate clothes to. They'd described her as a shark, but a shark who fought for the right people. Sitting in her small, unpretentious office, surrounded by stacks of files and the faint smell of coffee and determination, I felt the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks. Martha was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. She wore a no-nonsense pantsuit and had her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her pen occasionally scratching a note on her pad. I told her everything, the years of subtle disrespect, the growing isolation, and the horrific details of Thanksgiving Day. I told her about Alex's whispered confessions, about the garage, the insults, the constant fear he lived in. I finished, my voice hoarse, my hands clenched in my lap. She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "And your son," she said, her voice calm and direct. "He corroborates none of this?" "He's under her spell," I said, the words tasting like ash. "He believes her lies. He thinks I'm the one causing problems." Martha nodded slowly. "Evelyn, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. What you have right now is a he said, she said situation. In the eyes of the court, you have taken a child from his parents' home without their consent. They have the money, the influence, and the nuclear family image. We have your word. As powerful as it is, it's not enough. My heart sank. So, what can I do? We don't just fight, Martha said, leaning forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. We build an airtight case. We gather so much undeniable, documented proof that by the time we walk into that courtroom, they won't have a leg to stand on. We need to turn your word into evidence. We need to become architects of justice. That phrase, architects of justice, lit a fire in me. It gave my mission a name. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. To the outside world, I was just a quiet grandmother, caring for her grandson while a family dispute was sorted out. But in private, I became a detective, a spy, an archivist of Veronica's cruelty. My first task, on Martha's instruction, was to document everything. I bought a simple, lockable journal and began to write. I wrote down every memory of neglect, every backhanded compliment, every dismissive sigh. I detailed the Thanksgiving incident in excruciating, minute-by-minute detail, from the feel of the icy wind to the exact shade of blue on Alex's lips. I wrote down everything Alex had told me, using his exact words. The journal became my Bible, a testament to the truth. Next, we needed third-party corroboration. This was the hardest part. I had to reach out to people, to tread carefully, knowing Veronica had already poisoned the well. I started with the school. I called the school nurse, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman with a gentle voice. I didn't accuse. I inquired. I said I was concerned about Alex's health since he'd been with me. Had he seemed well this past semester? There was a hesitant pause. Between you and me, Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice dropping, we were a bit concerned. He was often very hungry when he arrived in the mornings. And he seemed tired. A few times he had bruises on his arms. He always said he got them playing, but there was a pattern. My blood ran cold. Did you document this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We have to. It's school policy, she confirmed. My heart leaped. It was a piece of the foundation. Martha was ecstatic. An official record from a mandated reporter was worth more than 1,000 of my own words. My next target was bolder. I remembered a young woman, Sarah, who had been Alex's babysitter for about 6 months before she'd abruptly quit. I found her on social media and sent her a message, asking if she'd be willing to have a cup of coffee. She agreed, hesitantly. We met at a quiet cafe. She was nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. Mrs. Miller, she said, wringing her hands, Veronica, she scares me. She made me sign a non-disclosure agreement when I left. I'm not asking you to break it, I said gently. I just want to know why you left. Her eyes filled with tears. It was the way she treated him, she whispered. She'd ignore him for hours, just scroll on her phone. If he made a mess, she'd call him stupid. She once locked him in the pantry for 5 minutes because he spilled his milk. I heard him crying. When I told her I wasn't comfortable with that, she fired me and threatened to ruin my reputation if I ever said a word. I recorded our entire conversation with a tiny digital recorder Martha had given me. Another brick in the wall. The masterstroke, however, came from a place I least expected. I knew I needed to get Veronica's own words on tape. Martha had warned me that in our state, it was legal to record a conversation as long as one party consented, and that party was me. The problem was, Veronica and David were refusing all direct contact, communicating only through terse, formal emails their lawyer probably wrote. I had to get creative. I knew Veronica was obsessed with her image and her status. Her parents were major donors to the city's most prestigious charity, the Children's Benevolence Fund. Every year, they hosted a lavish fundraising gala. It was the social event of the season. And I knew Veronica would be there, preening and posing. I bought a ticket. A single, expensive ticket that cost me nearly a month's worth of my pension. I bought a simple, elegant dark blue dress from a consignment shop. On the night of the gala, I put my hair up, put on the pearl earrings that had been my mother's, and armed myself with the tiny recorder tucked into my small evening bag. Walking into that ballroom was like walking into a lion's den. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, champagne flowed freely, and the city's elite mingled in a sea of tuxedos and gowns. I spotted her immediately. She was holding court near the silent auction tables, laughing, glowing, the perfect picture of charity and grace. David stood beside her, looking like a well-dressed ghost. I waited for my moment. I saw her head towards the secluded outdoor terrace for a breath of air. I followed. The air was cool, and the noise of the gala was a dull roar behind us. "Veronica," I said, my voice calm. She spun around, and the mask of pleasantness dropped from her face, replaced by pure venom. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was watching. "I came to talk," I said softly. "We have nothing to talk about." "You're insane, Evelyn. Everyone knows it. You've turned my own husband against his mother. You've traumatized my son by ripping him away from his home." This was it. I just had to let her talk. "He seems much happier with me," I said, a simple, undeniable truth. Her laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "Happier? He's a child. He's happy if you give him a cookie. That doesn't mean you're fit to raise him. He's a difficult, challenging boy. He needs a firm hand, not a doting old woman who lets him get away with everything. You have no idea what it takes. Putting him outside in freezing temperatures is a firm hand?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She stepped closer, her face a mask of rage. "He was being a brat. He threw a crystal vase my mother gave me and nearly broke it. He needed to learn a lesson. A little cold never hurt anyone. It builds character. Something you clearly know nothing about. You think you can win? You think you can take my son from me? I will bury you, you pathetic old woman. I will spend every last cent my family has to make sure you never see him again and that the entire world knows you for the senile, vindictive shrew you are." My hand was trembling in my purse, my finger holding down the record button. I had it. I had her. The pure, unadulterated poison, straight from the source. I didn't say another word. I just gave her a small, tight smile, turned around, and walked back into the ballroom, leaving her fuming on the terrace. I didn't gloat. I didn't react. I just walked out of that gala, got into my old car, and drove straight to Martha's office, dropping the recorder through the mail slot in her door. The next morning, Martha called me. There was a new energy in her voice, a thrill of the hunt. "Evelyn," she said, "we have her. This recording is the nail in her coffin. It's time to stop defending. It's time to attack." The foundation was built, the walls were up. The final phase of our plan was about to begin. It was time to execute. Part 4, The Storm and the Shelter. The execution wasn't a single, dramatic explosion. It was a series of precise, calculated strikes, each one designed to dismantle Veronica's perfect world, brick by brick. Martha orchestrated it like a symphony of destruction. The first strike was the legal petition. It was filed on a Tuesday morning. A humorless process server walked up the stone path of their perfect house and served Veronica with the papers as she was leaving for her yoga class. The petition was for an emergency hearing to grant me temporary sole custody of Alex, and it included a temporary restraining order against her. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the scene perfectly, the crisp white envelope in her manicured hand, her face contorting from confusion to disbelief to incandescent rage. The second strike was the evidence packet, delivered simultaneously to her lawyer and my son, David. It contained everything. Transcripts of my journal. A sworn affidavit from Sarah, the former babysitter, detailing the pantry incident and the non-disclosure agreement. A copy of the school nurse's official reports on Alex's malnourishment and bruises. and the piece de resistance, a full, unedited transcript and audio file of Veronica's tirade at the charity gala. There was no context that could save her, no way to spin the venom she had spewed. David called me that night. It was the first time he had called in months where he didn't sound angry or defensive. He sounded broken. "Mom?" His voice was choked, heavy with a shame so profound it was almost a physical presence over the phone line. I got the package from your lawyer. I listened to it. To her. I stayed silent, letting him speak. "I didn't believe you," he whispered, and a sob caught in his throat. "Oh God, Mom, I didn't believe you. I chose her. I defended her. While she was doing all that. To my own son. My boy." He was weeping now, deep, ragged breaths that tore at my heart, even after everything. What have I done? The anger I had held for him for so long finally dissipated, replaced by a wave of weary sadness. "You let yourself be blinded, David," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "Now, you need to open your eyes and decide what you're going to do about it." The emergency custody hearing was 3 days later. It wasn't the dramatic courtroom showdown I had seen in movies. It was in a small, sterile room with a tired-looking judge. Veronica was there, looking pale and drawn, her expensive suit doing nothing to hide the panic in her eyes. Her lawyer was a slick, confident man who immediately tried to paint me as an unstable, meddling grandmother. Then Martha stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented the evidence, piece by methodical piece. She read excerpts from the nurse's report. She played 10 seconds of Sarah's testimony. Then, she looked the judge in the eye. "Your Honor, we also have an audio recording of Mrs. Veronica Miller from 3 nights ago, where she refers to her son as a brat who needed to learn a lesson and admits that putting him in the freezing cold was a form of discipline." Veronica's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. My client was provoked. This was an illegal recording." Martha smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "In this state, Your Honor, single-party consent is all that is required." My client consented. The judge held up a hand, silencing the lawyer. He looked at Veronica, his expression one of pure disgust. He didn't even need to hear the recording. The transcript was enough. He looked at the paperwork, at the reports, and then at me. "Emergency temporary custody is granted to the petitioner, Evelyn Miller," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "A full hearing will be scheduled, and I am ordering Child Protective Services to open an immediate and thorough investigation into Mr. and Mrs. Miller." He banged his gavel, and just like that, it was over. The fallout was swift and brutal. The story leaked, just as Martha had predicted it would. A local news blogger, tipped off by an anonymous source, published an article with a headline that set the city's elite on fire: "Socialite mom's Thanksgiving secret, son, 6, left to freeze on doorstep." The story was everywhere. It was a scandal, juicy and horrifying, and it destroyed Veronica's carefully constructed image overnight. Her wealthy parents, mortified by the public disgrace, immediately distanced themselves. Their statement, issued through a lawyer, spoke of their shock and profound disappointment and their hopes for Alex's continued well-being. They cut her off financially, severing the lifeline that had funded her entire existence. The business partners David had so desperately tried to impress began to pull away, not wanting to be associated with the toxicity. The friends who had posted messages of support on her social media vanished into thin air. Her gilded cage had collapsed, and she was left alone in the wreckage. I went to the house with a police escort to collect Alex's things. David was there. He had packed 3 large suitcases for his son. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked at me, his face a canvas of regret. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything." He handed me a large envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for a significant amount of money and a signed letter giving me his full, unconditional consent for custody. He was leaving her. He was finally choosing his son. "Don't be sorry to me," I told him, my voice firm but not unkind. "You have a lifetime to be sorry to him. And a lifetime to make it right." The weeks that followed were quiet. The war was over. Alex and I settled into a new routine in my small, cozy apartment. For the first time in years, he was just a little boy. We built Lego castles that took over the entire living room floor. We baked cookies and made a glorious mess of the kitchen. I read him stories every night until he fell asleep, his breathing deep and even, no longer haunted by nightmares. The hollow look in his eyes was replaced by the old sparkle I had missed so desperately. He was healing. We both were. The revenge I'd sought wasn't for me. It was never about my own hurt feelings or the years of disrespect. I didn't gloat over Veronica's downfall. Her social ruin, her financial collapse, that was all just noise. My victory wasn't in her destruction, but in his salvation. My victory was the sound of his easy, genuine laughter filling my apartment. It was the feeling of his small hand slipping into mine as we walked to the park. It was seeing him sleep peacefully through the night. I had been underestimated. They saw a grandmother, a simple old woman to be managed and dismissed. They didn't see the fortress I had built around my heart for that little boy. They didn't understand that a grandmother's love isn't soft and sentimental. It's granite. It's iron. It's a force of nature that, once awakened, will not rest until her world is put right. They hurt my grandson. And they learned, far too late, that they hadn't just angered a grandmother, they had unleashed a hurricane. The journey was long, and the nights were dark, but in the end, justice found its way. It often does, when good people refuse to stand by and let darkness win. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, if you believe in standing up for the vulnerable, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a comment below. What did you think of the path I took? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice being served. Until next time, be safe and be strong.